Welcome to our podcast, Inspiring Living, with me, Mark Candelaria. I am an architect, blogger, traveler, chef, father, and husband. I am the founder and now partner of a fabulous 20-person architecture firm specializing in high-end residential architecture, designing amazing homes across the country. We have hosted tours over the last 20 years to Italy, Spain, and soon Napa. And in the course of all this, I have met a lot of interesting people who truly inspire me. We are excited to now be in our second season, and our podcast is about all the opportunities that are right there in front of us to inspire living. Yes, we will talk about architecture and design, but every week we will venture to all sorts of topics that will inspire you, teach you, and motivate you to inspire living every day. My guests will include a wide gamut of amazing people, from those in the design industry to clients to real estate professionals, chefs, artists, sports figures, and philanthropists, and people who just flat out get it. So sit back and enjoy, and let's have some fun exploring all the opportunities that are there just waiting for us. Please subscribe and get ready to be inspired every week. Okay, as my dad says, here we go. Welcome everyone to our podcast, Inspiring Living. I'm Mark Candelaria. I hope everyone had a fantastic Mother's Day. We sure did. I know Isabel and I are so blessed to have both of our moms still here and in our lives, and what a special day it was to spend this Mother's Day with the two of them. We offered to cook for Mom, but she said she wanted to do the cooking, and so we thought, okay, let's all go in and make Mom our guest on our Candelaria Design virtual cooking show, and she agreed, and so we filmed her preparing a complete German meal with steak rouladen and gravy, salted potatoes, and my mom's famous German red cabbage. Oh my God, it was absolutely amazing. So check that out on our website. We should have it up there soon, and you definitely want to give these recipes a try. Okay, then after dinner, Mom and I sat down and recorded this podcast telling us her story from growing up in war-torn East Prussia, Germany, and then her journey westward, as she explains, all the way to little Durango, Colorado, back in 1959, where she married my dad. This is an amazing story, and it definitely puts things in perspective on how fortunate, lucky, and blessed we all are, and how our destiny is waiting for us if we just follow our instincts and our heart, which my mom definitely did. Okay, give this podcast a listen. It's an amazing story. I know it will definitely inspire you. Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone. Today is Mother's Day, and so happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And given it's Mother's Day, I am so blessed and so happy to be spending this Mother's Day with not only my mom, but Isabel's mom, and my dad and Isabel are both in the house. How nice is that? Pretty darn nice, I'll tell you. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Happy Mother's Day to myself.
This is great to have you on the podcast. We've been waiting for quite a while. We had Dad on here about a year ago, and he was in season 1, episode 26, where he told his version of your and Dad's story. But I understand you have your own version of this story, and we already know, without hearing the details, that this is the true version of this story.
Of course.
So, in fact, none of us would be here celebrating Mother's Day if it was not for your story, Mom. So how about we get into it, huh?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, before we did that, we did do some cooking today, though, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
And that was a fabulous dinner. Tell us what you made for us today.
I made beef roll-ups. I made a German dinner. It's beef roll-ups, red cabbage, salt potatoes, and gravy. I made a Jaeger gravy. It's a mushroom gravy.
It was delicious.
And we had German cucumber salad and vanilla pudding with a cherry tart compote.
Yeah, it was delicious. And don't forget about your cabbage.
The red cabbage?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an old German recipe of sweet and sour red cabbage.
It was fantastic. So good. So thank you for that. And we will post that cooking session today on our website along with the recipe. So check that out pretty soon. She did a great job, and I'll tell you, it was fantastic. We were all just like kind of blown away at how good that recipe was. And it's not very hard, but check it out. You will love it. Okay, so let's get into the story. First, everyone thinks I'm Italian, and I do, in fact, have some Italian in me. Not a lot, but Dad is mostly Spanish, born here in the United States in Durango, Colorado. But you were not born here in the United States. You were born in
East Prussia.
East Prussia. So for those that don't know where East Prussia is, that isn't somewhere by Iran or Iraq. That's Persia,
Yes,
right?
right.
So East Prussia is where?
East Prussia was a German province on the Baltic Sea, the most northeast of Germany, of the main German.
Before the war.
Before the war, before
Right.
1945.
And where is East Prussia now?
East Prussia now, in 1945 or shortly thereafter, the Red Army took over, so they split East Prussia into mostly Poland, and one enclave is Russia.
Okay.
And they moved the German borders way back west.
Yeah.
And Germany lost all those territories.
That's right. So you were born far, far east on the
Right.
Baltic, near the Baltic Sea,
Yes.
in a little town called Tilsit, right?
It's not. It was the second largest city in East Prussia.
Okay.
I was born in a little place called Oberteich, which
Okay.
was
I
just.
told you we're going to get these stories correct,
Yeah,
right? The
it
facts
was-
correct.
It was just. It's a little village, and
Okay.
it's near Rustenburg. Rustenburg was the nearest larger town,
Okay.
and we moved to Tilsit because of my dad. He was transferred to Tilsit.
Okay.
And my dad is from Königsberg, which was the capital
Yep.
of East Prussia. And my mother is from Neidenburg, which is on the southwest corner of Prussia. So they met in between, and the rest, they got married. And
Yep.
my dad was transferred and stationed near Rustenburg, and that's why we lived temporary in Oberteich.
Okay, so we'll let people figure out the math, but what year are we talking about?
We're talking 1939.
1939. September 13th, 1939 is when you were born, right?
Yes.
And so that was an interesting time because that was right when the war was about to start. I think Germany invaded Poland right about that time.
Yeah, on the 1st of September, I believe.
Right. So virtually days before you were born,
Yeah.
the war began, in essence.
Right.
And so you're way out there in far eastern Germany. And as the war progressed, it was you, and then you're the oldest,
I'm the oldest.
and then you have a younger sister and a younger brother,
Right,
right?
right.
And as the war progressed, you guys had to move westward, right? You had a
Well-
choice. You go east or you go west.
We couldn't go east because we lived. Tilsit is a border city
Yep.
to Lithuania.
Okay.
So the Russian army, the Red Army, was marching west,
Yep.
and we were right in the way where they came.
Okay.
So we had to
Flee.
escape. First of all, our city was totally bombed out, about 90% when we left. So we had to escape because there was nothing, we couldn't stay there. So we fled with my mother's sister and her daughter. And then my mother and my brother was 9 months old,
Okay.
and my sister and myself. And we just went west. Although my aunt had been evacuated to the island of Rügen, which is Germany's largest island in the Baltic Sea, and she had come home because, the war wasn't progressing, and she thought maybe everything would be okay.
Mhm.
Well, then it got worse, so we all left, and we said, well, let's go there and see if we can hide and stay there until the war's over.
And how old were you then, roughly?
And I was about 5.5 years old.
Okay. So how much of that do you remember?
I remember quite a bit
Yeah.
because it was very traumatic, and certain things kind of stick in your mind.
Yeah.
So
then you're on this island in the Baltic Sea. You're
we're
5
on
years
this
old.
island.
Now, where was our grandfather, Opap?
We did not know where he was. He was in the military.
Okay.
He was taken in the military, and we did not know where he was.
Yeah.
But he knew that my aunt had been evacuated to that place.
Okay.
So we figured that if he survived, he would probably go there and look for us.
Find us. Yeah. So this is
Yeah.
obviously before a lot of telephones and email and,
Yes.
and voicemail and
Yeah.
cell phones, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. When someone left, you didn't know where they
No,
went. Yeah.
no communication.
So you're on that island. You're 5 years old. How long were you on that island?
We lived there for 9 years.
Okay.
What was interesting was when we got there, my aunt had a little attic apartment with her and her daughter, and it was impossible for all of us to stay there because there was my mom and 3 of us
Yeah.
children, and my brother was a baby. We were very lucky, first of all, that we made it out of East Prussia
Mhm.
because at
The
that
Russians
time the Russians were coming, plus East Prussia was cut off after World War One, and there was a corridor that belonged to Poland that Germans lost. So that was Poland, and it was very difficult to go through there. It took us 4 days from Königsberg, that's where we started to take off,
Yep.
till we got to the island.
Yep.
When we got there, we stayed in a hotel because that little room was too close. You know, it was just, you couldn't, my mom and my aunt couldn't stand up
Right.
straight. So anyway, we stayed in a hotel until the people there in that little town told us that there was some room left in a farmhouse and that they could, we could live there and my mom could work on the farm.
That was my question: is what did they do for money? I mean, for a living.
Well, at first they had a savings account that they could use. My mom, my aunt, her husband was he was in the German Air Force, and he got killed, and so she was getting a pension from him because of him. But my mother, we didn't know where my dad was or anything, so they used up her account, and then she had to go and stay on this farm at work.
Wow. So then you were there. How long were you there? Till you're 14, you said?
Yes, but we didn't live on that farm. They had the little village had 5 houses. It was originally, they were like cottages with wheat roofs, and usually 2 families lived in one house. They were long houses. They were actually very cute. They had wheat roofs, and they were nice. They had one part of the house was their barn. They had a cow, and so excuse me. Originally, these people were peasants that worked on an estate nearby. And the owners usually provided housing and a few things for them to keep them going.
Right.
So anyway, there were 2 major farmhouses owned by the people.
Okay, so then from there, how did you ultimately end up in Mannheim?
And that's a long story, too. And it was hair-raising. Anyway, I went to school. School was about 1.5 miles away. My mom and dad worked. My dad came back from the war.
Okay.
And found us. And they got a little farm, and they worked on the little farm for, 3 years or 4 years. And it became so hard because the tariffs that the communists set for them, they couldn't make enough, they couldn't grow enough things to fulfill the tariff.
Wow.
And what they did then is if a farmer couldn't do it, they would put him in prison. So my dad started bees, and they sold honey, and that's how they made up for it. But we were starving.
Wow.
So finally, they gave that up. They gave the land back to the owner, the original owner. And my dad found employment he was a landscape architect on the side. And they made him what they call an agronome. It's a high title with not much behind it. My mother's got a job in the city at a newspaper. So our life improved a little bit.
Yeah.
I had to go to school. Went to school. It was about 1.5 miles to walk, on that island.
Yep.
And I went there to the 8th grade. And then I went 1.5 years, I think, after that. It's kind of equivalent to high school, but not quite. It's more into a technical
like a trade school.
And excuse me. So that's where I went. And anyway, my mother said something that was not politically correct. And at work, it was advised that she better leave because her boss was a very strong communist, and that he was going to turn her in as a traitor. She said something about the Russians released a bunch of German men that they had captured during the war, and this was already in 1954.
Wow.
And they were releasing them, and she said, well, my father was an old man, and he was taken off the streets and taken to Russia, and we never saw him again, and he wasn't a warmonger. And her boss said, the Russians released a bunch of German warmongers. So anyway, making a long story short, she escaped. She came from work. She didn't come home. She went to my aunt's house. And from there, she took a train to Berlin because my grandmother, who had come from East Prussia, was released in 1950. She had a cousin, so that my mom, she gave her the address. My mom went there. We had no idea. We didn't know if she made it or anything. But anyway, my dad, this was on a Wednesday. My dad said, okay. He didn't tell my brother and my sister what we're doing. We were going to a birthday party. But I knew. He told me.
Yeah.
So my sister and I went at night, took the last train to the mainland at 10 o'clock at night. She was 12, I was 14.
Just the two of you.
Just the two of us, and we were supposed to wait at the train station on the mainland. So we did, and it was very frightening.
Yeah, I bet.
Because living on the island, people know everybody,
Yep.
Kind of like in that little town. So we didn't know if my brother and my dad would make it.
Right.
And then we were really scared at what if they don't come, if they don't show up later,
then what
do we do? And our ticket was just to there.
Yeah.
So, but my dad did come. And I remember he said that when he saw us, he was scared to death to look at us because we were so scared sitting there. But anyway, everything that turns out good. We went to Berlin. At that time, the wall wasn't up.
Yep.
All the eastern borders were up through Germany. You couldn't go anywhere except through Berlin. We made it through the net. We rode the streetcar, the underground. They had an S-Bahn and U-Bahn.
Yep.
And we made it through, and then we did get into West Berlin, and that was like a relief. What I wanted to say, though, is we left everything in Tilsit, our personal belongings, everything. We as children had no toys, nothing. We couldn't take anything.
Right.
We had very little in East Germany because conditions there were extremely poor.
Yeah. After the war, there wasn't anything.
And then we left again with nothing but a little box of personal things, very little clothes, and this was in January. So anyway, we went to Berlin, and we came into a refugee camp, and this was in 1954. Then we were flown by Pan Am Airlines from Berlin to Frankfurt. From Frankfurt, we had to take a train to Munich, and there we were processed and stayed in a refugee camp there for over a year.
Wow.
And nobody was allowed to work, and we were totally reliant on handouts, whatever the government gave.
You.
And from there, we were assigned work for my family, my dad and my mom, in Mannheim, which was a different state. Munich was Bavaria. Mannheim is in Baden-Württemberg. Well, anyway, there again, we were in a refugee camp, and it was a bar. On top of the bar was their ballroom, and they had it divided with blankets. And since we were 5, we had 2 bunk beds. I guess my sister and I slept in one, and then my mom and dad each had one, and my brother. And that's how we lived for over a year.
Wow.
And there were 7 families in that ballroom, divided like that. And 1 2-plate cooking stove.
Yep.
It was awful. But we were in school, and my dad got to work. He got to, and my mom too. They both started work. They allowed them to work. So, and then we ended up later on getting an apartment, a brand new apartment that they built for refugees. And so that's how we got to Mannheim.
Interesting.
And shortly after that, I went to
So how old were you then, roughly?
I was about 15, 16, 17, 16.
Yep. Okay.
And then I went to a trade school. I got a spot in a trade school, which I think, looking back, it's a very interesting concept because you had to go to school certain days of the week, and then on the other days, you did an internship with a business.
Yeah, that's good.
They made the contract, and you had to stay with them until your 3 years or whatever it was were up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting. You got practical experience plus book experience,
Yep.
academics. And so I did that for the Lutheran Church. I worked in their bookkeeping office.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it was a tax office because over there they tax people, property taxes, church tax. And so anyway, and then I met your dad in Mannheim. It was prominent in Germany on Sundays. People go window shopping.
Okay.
Stores and everything would be closed, and people would go on the boulevard sort of to
So let's
window
explain
shop.
why Dad was there.
Dad was in the service.
From the United States.
He was from the United States. He was in the Army.
Yep.
And he and a lot of the soldiers, when they were not working or not supposed to be on base or whatever on weekends, they would go to town too and kind of look around. And
They were doing some window shopping too.
They were window shopping too in more ways than one. And they had their hangouts where they would go and all that. So anyway, I used to go to the America House, which was a cultural center where you can meet people, Americans. They had square dance and taught German girls that. And then they had tea for German girls. They were taken by the GI clubs, officers clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was all part of I don't know what it was called, but it was also. Anyway, I met your dad there, and I didn't speak English, he didn't speak German, but we were always in a group.
Yeah.
There was always somebody in my group, a couple of girls always spoke a little English.
Yep.
And he was with a couple of guys that always spoke a little German.
Okay.
So that's how we
Communicated.
communicated. I had my favorite little dictionary,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned quickly how to flip pages and find the right words.
Yep.
And so we didn't really meet a lot because this was like October when I first met him.
Yep.
And he already left. They weren't allowed to off base anymore at the end of November. And he was supposed to go back to the United States in January.
Okay.
And this was in 1956,
Okay.
seven.
Okay.
So anyway, I met him there, and we liked each other, and it was kind of good. But there was not much communication.
Right.
But anyway, he gave me his address, and I gave him my address. So people in the Army helped him
Translate.
translate into German, my German into English and vice versa. I had a girlfriend, she knew how to speak English fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
But I wrote my letters in English, and I still have them. And
Wow.
when we get to, sometimes we look at them and they're really crumbly now, but it's funny because I use the dictionary. And the words are all spelled correctly,
Yep.
but the sentences are not.
Don't make sense.
No. And it's kind of hilarious, but he got the point. But
Yeah.
anyway,
You gotta scan those.
I had friends. We had friends that had family in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people, his name was Paul, he was going to go and immigrate there. These friends were also that we met in the refugee camp.
Okay.
So he was going to go to Canada and visit his uncle and aunt and see if he liked it, and he was going to stay. And his sister stayed in Germany. Anyway, we were writing to them, and he told me, why don't you come and meet I have some cousins here and all that. It's really great, and I'm sure you'll like it. When you get done with school, why don't you come and take a trip and see if you like it?
This is to Canada.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to go.
Yep. And how old were you then?
I was 17.
17. Wow.
17. So anyway, I did go. Although your dad he went back the last time I saw him was in 56.
Yep.
He went back to the United States in 57.
Okay.
I went to Canada in 58.
Okay.
And I liked it, but
And where in Canada were you?
in Calgary.
In Calgary. Okay.
Yeah, in Calgary, Canada. It was very nice. Calgary was a new city. It
Yep.
was 50 years old when I got there. And the outskirts, streets, and everything were oiled. They
Yep.
weren't paved. And Calgary reminded me of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Stampede was there that year, and I got to see the Stampede, which was very interesting to me.
From someone from Germany, that'd be
Uh-huh.
pretty foreign experience.
And everybody on the train. I took a boat from Halifax, France,
Mhm.
to Southampton, England, to Halifax, Canada.
Wow, interesting.
And then I took the train from Halifax all the way to Calgary.
And you were 17.
I was 18 by
18.
then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much money did you have with you when you?
Not very much.
And what did you have? Just a suitcase?
I had one suitcase and a
Wow.
purse.
Wow.
And in a small suitcase. It wasn't very
What did
big.
you think? You had a lot of time to think across that whole
A lot
time
of
span.
time.
Between a train ride and a boat ride.
I guess I was excited to see. When I was a little kid, I've always looked west.
Mhm.
And I've always looked at the sunset and said, I want to go there.
Interesting.
And that's kind of what, now I was going west.
You were going west, way
Yeah,
west.
Way west.
Yep.
So I let it all kind of fall on me.
Sure.
And
Just let it happen.
let it happen, and then slowly digesting it,
Right.
to see, is this where I want to go or this? But anyway, that's how I looked at everything. Well, making a long story short, I decided they were going to marry me off. And
The people in
the
Calgary?
people, yeah. I stayed with one of his cousins. He was employed in the oil fields in the Yukon.
Yep.
And they had a very nice house, and they were, average middle-class family. They had a swimming pool and all that, which is pretty good in
yeah.
Calgary.
Yep.
And they said, well, they would put the wedding on and all that, and they were very religious,
Mm-hmm.
and everything had to be checked with the minister.
Yep.
And that didn't sit too good with me. I was too independent.
Yeah.
I wanted to decide for myself.
You didn't want someone to write your book. You wanted to write your own book.
Yeah. So I said no. I
Yeah.
said, give me a little more time. I'm too young. I need to think about this.
Right.
Well, I didn't want to stay with them because that wouldn't be fair. So I went to the immigration office and said, okay, what are my options? Can I stay here and get a job, or do I have to go back?
Right.
So they said, well, if you stay here and get a job, you can stay. If you want to stay here, get a job,
Yep.
and we can help you with the job because I didn't speak English.
Okay.
So the only option that you more or less have is to be an au pair or, work in somebody's home with
Right.
kids or whatever. Well, we have the family for you. So they had the family with 3 little boys, 6, 4, and 2.
Okay.
How bad can it get?
Hey, it was good training for what was coming down the road.
And I didn't really know if I even wanted to have children
Right.
when I grew up. But anyway, it was a very nice family. They owned a drugstore, and they had designed and built their own home on the Bow River in Calgary, in a very nice area. So I stayed there for 6 months, and by then I learned English, to speak English.
Yep.
The little boys were very good. I had to read stories all the time, and they would correct every word that I misspelled
So
or
meanwhile, you're
mispronounced.
still writing letters to my dad.
I'm still writing letters to your dad. I'm
Yep.
still telling your dad that, I'm in Canada now and blah, blah, blah. Well, by the time, and then I spoke English pretty good, and I decided I wanted to get a job
Right.
where I made some money. And I got a job at the wheat pool in Calgary, an
Right.
office job. So I was there and writing to your dad, and the Canadian family asked me if I wanted to help her babysit in the summer. They go for 6 weeks to Idaho, to Spirit Lake, Idaho. And in the meantime, I had applied to Canadian Pacific Airlines to be a flight attendant.
Oh, nice.
And I was kind of in between,
Mhm.
waiting. And I agreed. And I wrote to your dad and said, I'm going to be in Idaho. Why don't you come up here and visit? It'd be nice. We could see each other and all
Yep.
that. And he said, why don't you come down? My best friend, which is Anthony, is
Yep.
getting married, and you can meet my family. And it's not that far. Well, I had no idea that I was going to buy a train ticket. Well, there was no train from Idaho to
Durango.
Colorado. So so I had to buy a bus ticket.
Yep.
But
That's
anyway,
a long bus ride.
I took a long bus ride. I went through several states. I went to Salt Lake, stayed overnight, and then took a bus to Durango.
Wow.
Very
This
interesting.
is in 1959.
This was in 1959
Wow.
in July. I came to Durango, and your dad was working at the Coca-Cola
Okay.
plant. His mom and Aunt Leva picked me up.
I
And
can only imagine what they were thinking.
I know. Saying, this girl is something.
Some little German girl just
Yeah.
got off the bus in Durango.
I know.
She barely speak English.
Well, I spoke pretty good already then.
Wow.
When we got to their house, they wanted me to call and talk to your dad.
Yep.
So I did. He didn't believe it was me
Huh.
because when he left, I didn't speak English.
Oh, yeah. And all of a sudden you could speak a little bit.
Yeah, and I did pretty good because I made the office job.
Yeah.
So, I learned pretty good. So, but anyway, he came and all that, and they let me stay there because I was only going to stay about 3 days.
Wow.
I was going to go
Long trip for 3 days.
stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
And they said, no, you can stay with us and, and all that. So then he proposed to me.
That didn't waste any time.
He didn't waste any time. Well, we found out that his sister Carrie was also getting married.
Okay.
And she had a little problem with Chris, with her prospective husband. And see, they finally got that eased out,
Uh-huh.
ironed out, and they made a date, August 10th. So your dad said, well, heck, we may as well make it a double wedding.
You made it all the way down here. Let's not waste this
let's
opportunity.
not waste. But the way he was, he said, we either get married now,
Yep.
because I said, give me a year. I wanted to be a flight attendant and go to Vancouver. I said, give me a year, and then we'll get married. No, we either get married now or forget it. Then I had to say, well, what am I going to do now? So then I decided, okay, I'll take a chance. I'll get married. Then I had problems with the church because I was Lutheran and he was Catholic.
Right.
And at that time, the Catholic Church wouldn't marry us unless we were both Catholic. So I decided, well, if that's what it takes, just sign me up.
So this is all like in 1 week's time.
It's all in a couple of weeks' time.
Wow.
So I got signed up and I went to lessons, and his grandmother and grandfather baptized me,
Okay.
Catholic. We got all that done, had a double wedding with Carrie and Chris.
Yep.
And we stayed in Durango for a little while. We got a little apartment over at an old jewelry store.
Yeah. So let me ask you
And-
this real quick. When this all happened, I mean, I think there was maybe telephones happening there.
Yeah.
But how did your folks take all this news?
Well, it was very difficult to tell them. Actually, I did write a letter, and in those days the letter took 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So they didn't really know until after. They sent roses, and the roses arrived while we were on our honeymoon going to Denver
Yep.
to see if I could legally stay in this country.
Right.
So it was they were shocked,
Huh.
but they were saying that it's out of their control.
Right.
So it just all happened.
Yep.
So we got married and all that, and we your dad's brother lived in Denver. They had just moved to Denver. They got married in October. We got married in August.
Wow.
They got married in October. And they went to Denver right away, got a job at the railroad, and he said, why don't you guys come up here? There is more work than in Durango.
Yeah.
And that's how we ended up in Denver.
Yep.
And so, and then we got settled there. 1201 Logan was our first apartment.
Yeah, right downtown.
Uh-huh.
Dad got a job at the railroad.
Dad got a job at the railroad. I got a job first at Mady and F.
Yeah, which happened to be the same place where Tiff got her first job in Denver 50 years later.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And Josh living in the same house.
Yeah, and then Tiffany's boyfriend, his first apartment in Denver was the house that I was born in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was 50 years later.
Uh-huh.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is
It was
crazy.
just weird, the energy.
It is. It's
Yeah.
really weird.
So anyway, you
Yeah.
guys are in Denver. You're downtown Denver, working there for a few years and living
Yeah.
there. But then you guys found a new neighborhood, a new little part of Denver that was growing, called North Glen, Colorado.
Yeah. It was a new little suburb.
Yep.
And so we decided, we used to go looking apartments. Apartments were kind of awful. It's kind of that life. And then having a baby, we didn't want to live in an apartment. I said, if we're paying the rent, let's go look for a house and
Yep.
a yard. So that's why we found North Glen. And
Let's back up a little bit. I know another good story you have is when I was born.
Yeah, I had a little hard time.
Yeah.
I actually had a very hard time, and I almost didn't make it.
So you guys were waiting to go to the hospital, and I think it was the World Series.
The World Series. I started to go. I started to have labor pains, and the World Series was on, and I kept saying, and it wasn't that bad or anything. I kept saying, we were both watching it. Your dad was an avid baseball fan, so we were both watching it, and I kept saying no, and he kept saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Do you want to go?" And I said, "No, let's wait. I'm fine." I said, "Let's wait." And it got so exciting. That game was so
it was the
exciting.
Pirates and the Yankees, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then was Bill Mazeroski was the one that hit the home run.
Hit the walk-off home run to win the game.
Yeah, to win the game, and then we went.
Yep.
So yeah,
Had to wait for that to happen first.
Yeah,
and then you went to the hospital, and it was a rough deal.
It was a rough deal
having me born.
Then we came home, and they had given me drugs in the hospital that were not complementary to a new baby. So you had a little bit of problem at first with milk, and we tried allergies.
Yep.
And after we got that all straightened out, and Grandpa, your dad's mom came and helped me out.
Yep.
And I had a very, very good pediatrician.
Dr. McDonald.
Yeah, he was just wonderful. And so we lived in an apartment first, and then slowly we lived in another one, and then we decided to buy a house. And at that time, we used to go to model homes all the time to see, what can we afford, how did they build homes, and blah, blah, blah. And that's how it got started.
Yep.
And then after you were a little toddler, we were still going.
Right.
We decided this was our starter home, and maybe someday we can move into a better, more expensive home or whatever. And so we kept going, and I loved it. I loved to go and see how they built those houses and what the furniture looked like.
Well, from your perspective, too, now that I hear your whole story, to all of a sudden have this nice house. We had, 3 bedrooms, a whole basement. I mean, that must have been just amazing to you.
It was wonderful. We had
big yard.
Big yard. Yeah, it was. And
nice grocery stores, and everything was right there.
Close by, and a nice, clean neighborhood.
Yeah. So in 10 years, your life changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
totally.
From 1950 to 1960, it was like a whole different world.
It was.
Yeah, that's just amazing.
Went through all these steps and landed right there.
Kept going west.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It's amazing.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
No, and then I remember as a little boy, you guys bought me Legos, and I'd had that whole basement downstairs, and it was just wide open. I could build cities and all kinds of things, and then, we'd go to look at all the model homes that were being built all the time. I've told this story many times, but I would get the brochures, and then I would build models of them, and we had this big field behind our house, and I would subdivide it and sell the lots off to aunts and uncles when they'd come to town. So that's where I really got the love for being an architect.
Exactly. And we had the whole corner in the backyard was your fort that you built.
Build forts, yep.
And then your little brother came along, and he was about 4 years younger, and he didn't understand after he got walking on his own. He didn't understand when you tried to tell him, no, you can't walk there, or you can't do this, or don't touch this. And then you guys would fight.
Yep.
So... And he was interested in cars. He wasn't really interested in building things.
Right. Yep. But
so
we had a lot of fun. We'd go camping a lot in the mountains, and
it was very nice. And I loved the mountains.
Yeah.
It was so nice. We went fishing.
And then all the sports. We'd play football and baseball and basketball and went to great schools. And then we eventually ended up in Durango, Colorado, back in where Dad was born.
In 1974.
1974, and I finished high school there, which was fantastic. I still see a lot of my high school friends. In fact, I had dinner with one just 2 nights ago.
Yeah,
And so that was a wonderful place to come back to then.
it is.
And we had a lot of fun there. And then you guys moved back to Denver later in
In
1982?
Yeah, your dad worked. We lived in Durango from 74 to 81.
81, okay.
And then your dad got transferred back to Denver because they sold the little railroad.
Yeah, so Dad worked on the steam locomotive in Durango, and I
Yeah.
got to work with him for a couple years, which was a lot of fun.
Uh-huh.
And then they sold that railroad, so he moved back to Denver
Right.
and finished his retirement till he retired there.
Yes.
Yeah,
And then we were kind of going back and forth, and Jim wanted us to move to Durango. And in the meantime, we couldn't even afford to buy our old house back in
Right.
Durango. Prices have gone up so much. And then we were concerned about medical care as we were retired. And the housing, too, was not too, and cold.
right.
So then finally
I
we
kept trying
decided.
to nudge you
yeah,
guys to move down to Arizona, where it's nice and warm and no stairs in your house.
Yes. And that was the best thing we ever did. I wished we would have done it sooner, because now it's, we're getting too old to do some of the fun things that you can do in Arizona.
Yeah, no, but we,
You know?
we make the most of it. We have a lot of
Yeah.
fun. And
We
it's
do.
great. I mean, last year was tough with COVID. We barely got to see
Yeah.
each other.
I know.
But today was a special day. And obviously, had it not been for Mom and Dad meeting in Germany and you taking that bus ride,
I know.
we would none of us would be here right now today.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing story.
It was a bumpy ride, but we did make it.
Yeah.
We came over all the bumps.
Yep. So and
Yeah.
then you became a U.S. citizen. Some other
Yeah.
great things.
Jim went with me to court.
Yeah.
That was a very nice experience. It was a little difficult to become a United States citizen, and sometimes I don't want to get political,
Mhm.
but I had a very hard time. First of all, to go to Canada, I had to have a chest X-ray. I had to make sure I had no TB
Right.
and a doctor examination. At the time, I had a little spot on my lungs. I had a really bad cold, and something showed up on my lungs. So they denied my visa to go to Canada.
Huh.
And I had to wait, 6 weeks or something, and then had to prove that I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did, they allowed me to go to Canada. When I came to Canada, I had to go to a lung institute to be totally checked out to make sure that, I didn't have TB or whatever.
Right.
That all checked out good. When I came to the United States, I didn't really have to get a visa because I came with Canadians and we were just going to stay 6 weeks in Idaho on vacation and
Yep.
then go back. There was such a law that you could do that. Well, when I got married, when I stayed in Durango and got married, first thing we did is go to Denver to the immigration office to see what do I have to do to apply as, to a citizenship.
Right.
So they gave me papers to fill out for a green card, and I received a green card. And I had to go every 6 months to the health department to get a chest X-ray just to be sure that I didn't have TB,
Wow.
which was kind of not so good. And in those days, X-rays were pretty tough because they weren't perfected like they are now.
Yep.
But anyway, so I did that, and then I had a friend of mine said, when I started working, she said, you know what, you're paying Social Security into Social Security, but you can't collect Social Security unless you're an American citizen.
Right.
So I thought, well, what am I waiting for?
Yep.
So I took lessons. I had some books. A friend gave me books and all. You had to do all that. I went for a test. I applied. I went for a test. And I think it had over 100 questions on there. And then we got a court date. We had to go to court, and Jim went with me. And it was very nice. It was very formal, but it was, very welcoming.
Yeah.
And the judge even asked me a couple of questions, personal,
Yeah.
which was really nice.
That's
and then I
cool.
got a nice packet of the Constitution and all kinds of different things.
Yep.
And so that's how I became a citizen.
I remember
then.
the party. We had a big party in the basement.
In the basement.
Yeah, we got it all decorated. And that was the day you became a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, and some friends of your dad's or people that he worked with and stuff. We were there. Yeah, we had several people there.
Yeah.
It was very nice.
It was very nice.
Uh-huh.
And then in terms of your career, you really got interested in the medical field.
Yeah. I had the background of working as a bookkeeper. I took that in Germany and in the classes there. and I got my diploma and stuff in Germany for that. But because of the language, at first I had a little bit of problems. I used to cross the sevens with the little bar. That's how they do in Germany. Well, a lot of times people were saying here, we, might mistake that for something else. So but I did get several jobs. I worked for a fashion bar, which was a department store. I worked for Mady and F. They hired me for Christmas to work in the glove department, and they kept me on because I knew how to type and stuff. And then I got a job in their controller's office doing controlling comptometry.
Okay.
So I did that, and then when I worked for Fashion Bar, I was a import agent, and it was an interesting job too. But I don't want to get into deep. It had its problem. I discovered that company was ripped off by their agents, their customs agents, and I saved them all kinds of money, and they offered me a 5 cents increase in my wages.
Wow.
So I said, no, thank you, and I left.
Yep. So how did you get into the medical thing?
When we moved to Durango, there was no work in Durango, and this was in the 70s. 70s was bad.
Well, even before that in North Glen, you were an EMT.
Yeah, I was a volunteer in the, that's where I really got started with the medical. I worked for the North Glen Ambulance as a volunteer. I took a class at the Denver hospital. It's the surgical department. It was the second EMT class that they were offering in Denver.
Yep.
And I did that for about 4 years.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then after that, I got a job at St. Anthony Hospital.
There you go.
In the EKG department.
That's
as
right.
an EKG tech. And I stayed there until we moved to Durango. And then the only thing in Durango that was available was the LPN program, the licensed nursing program. I took that. My first job in Durango was at the La Plata County Hospital in the emergency room. And that was very interesting. And there I met several of the doctors, and one of them had an opening in his office, and I decided that would probably be better than working nights in the emergency
Dr. Wigton.
room. Yeah.
For those from Durango who listen, I know a lot of Durango listeners, so that was old Dr. Wigton.
Dr. Wigton. Yeah. And I stayed there.
He ran his old office.
What?
Didn't you run his office?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I worked in his. I love that office. That was an old, kind of a Spanish-style house and stuff. It was nice.
Next to the Pizza Hut.
Next to the Pizza Hut, and I worked there until 81, until we had to go back to Denver.
Yep.
And in the meantime, in 74, when we first moved to Durango, I took the LPN classes, and that's how I got going that way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And when we came back to Denver, I decided the LPN alone isn't going to be enough. And I went to Metro State in Denver.
And how old were you then?
And I was 42 or so, 43 years old already.
So you just kept going. You've always just kept going.
And I went there and I got my RN.
Yep.
And then I worked at St. Anthony Hospital for a while. And then I did other things too. I worked for a rehab company. I always ended up off administrative jobs for whatever reason, I guess because that was my initial training, you know, and it's just I always ended up that way.
Interesting.
And then I worked in a couple of nursing homes. I was a nursing assistant, director of nursing assistants. I was a human resource director, which staff development and the whole shebang.
Yeah.
So I have a pretty good. I worked as infectious control nurse. So I had a good clinical and administrative medical experience.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Until I retired.
All the way from East Prussia, Germany.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, a little way off country that nobody really knows where it is anymore now.
And you went back to the little island at one time.
We went. Your dad and I went in 1995. And back to that little town that, we were living at. And the funny story is they really hadn't made much progress. I mean, it was
still... Because it was taken over by East Germany, right?
It was all East Germany, and it was awful living there.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so poor and so badly run. People were poor. They didn't have anything, and the politics were so bad. But when we went in 95, since it had become one Germany,
Yeah.
they started to clean up. The roads were being fixed, and a lot of the things. They fixed that house that we lived in.
Yep.
It looked nicer. And the funny part is, and the island is beautiful, and now especially it's all touristy again.
Interesting.
And they have some beautiful homes there that they rent out for, like here, R&Bs, Airbnbs and things like that. They rent it out. Funny thing is, I did Google Earth the other day. Our house in Tilsit, where we lived,
Yep.
is still there.
Wow.
It was built in 1905. It was on the outskirts of town, and the town was pretty much totally destroyed. But a few houses on the outside are there still. And
So you went to
ours
Google
is
Maps
one of
and you
them.
could still see it.
You can go around it, you can see it, and I recognized the street,
Isn't that
I
crazy?
recognized the house, and I knew about the direction where it was. That's
Yeah.
how I found it.
Wow, that must have been something to see.
It
that.
was, and the funniest thing is, then a year later, they added onto it, and it was kind of lopsided at the time when I first saw it. Now they added onto it, and they evened it out.
Oh, interesting.
And now it's painted different, and it's there was a comment under it, and it says somebody was going to. They say it's a tourist attraction.
Mm-hmm.
So these people went there, and they said no, they didn't let them in. They say it was a boarding school now,
Huh.
and they don't let anybody in there.
Wow.
So it still has our iron fence and the walls, the pillars,
Yep.
everything is still there.
Just the way it was.
Uh-huh.
1939.
1939. Well, yeah, we left there in 45.
Right. Wow, that's
so,
amazing.
Uh-huh. And in Zellrügen, that little house that we rented, it was awful. It had dirt floors. My dad found old tile and made a floor in there and
Wow.
fixed it up a little bit. There was no plumbing, no nothing, outhouses, and very primitive.
So what do you think of this country, Mom?
What I think of this country, it's the best country in the world.
Right?
The thing I think about most is the freedom that people have here
Yep.
that you don't find anywhere, not in Germany yet either.
No, we take it for granted.
You take it for granted.
Yep.
And it's worth more than anything that you can buy in any store.
Yep, for sure. For
So
sure.
That's
Well,
and I'm worried about this country that
yeah, we do.
we are
all worry.
losing our freedom here.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and people don't realize that.
Yep. We
So-
gotta covet our freedom for sure. I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely something that is just a true
It's
treasure.
the most precious thing that people don't realize that. But if you can do what you want to do, more or less,
Yep.
that's
Well,
it's
you would have
worth-
never accomplished anything that you just said in this hour without freedom.
No,
It would have never happened.
no, would have never. In East Germany, if you didn't belong to the Young Pioneers, which was a youth, communist youth group,
Yep.
you didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
people were ratting on each other and turning each other in,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
horrible. People don't get it. They just
they don't get
it, right?
And it was the same in East Prussia under Hitler. If you were not in the party, like my dad was not in the Nazi party,
Yep.
he was limited as to his career
Right.
in any business or whatever if you were not in the party.
Yep.
But the good thing is, even though he was harassed, but you still could decide not to become
Haven't
to
gotten
go into
quite
the
that
party.
far yet.
And in East Prussia, in East Germany, after the communists got there, it was almost the same way. But by the time we left,
Right.
you still had the freedom of not belonging to the Communist Party. But after that, it got worse. That's when Putin took over.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't hear much about any freedom in Russia these days.
No,
Or China, for that matter.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Yeah, that's the number one thing in this country, and people take it for granted, and
Yeah.
it's fragile.
It is very fragile. It slips away and you don't
Yep.
realize it.
Exactly.
Well, today was an amazing day, Mom. We had so much fun. Your dinner was, like I said at the beginning, was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. It was fun to cook with you. I hadn't done that in a while.
I know.
And so that was a lot of fun. And I'm glad we got it all on film, so we're going to have it on our website.
Right.
And I encourage everybody to make it because it is so easy and it is so
It
good.
is. It's very easy.
Yeah, it was awesome. So you're amazing. I love you to death. I
Thank
just
you.
think you're one of the most wonderful ladies that have inspired me so much and have done so
Great.
much for me my whole life. So I really appreciate it. And I love you, Mom.
I love you too, Mark, and I'm so proud of my boys. I'm so proud of all the things that you've done and doing, and your attitude and your loving heart. Really, it makes me cry, but it's all good. I'm so blessed.
We're blessed.
Really,
We're blessed to have you in our
yeah.
family. Blessed to have Dad in our family.
Yes,
So
we all are. I have a wonderful family and all the relatives and everything.
yeah,
It's
Isabel
all
and
good.
her mom just merged right into our family. It's
Yep.
been wonderful. Well, thanks
Sure
for
is.
podcasting with us, Mom. How do we find you? Where do we find you and connect with you on social media? I will do it for you because I know you probably don't know. It's Karin_Candelaria on Instagram.
Right.
And I know you're on Facebook too. So give my mom a shout out. She did a great job today. Thank you for telling us the story because it's nice to have it all recorded now.
Yes.
And it wasn't that far off from Dad's story.
Not really.
I think it was pretty darn close.
Mhm.
So if you get a chance, you heard Mom's story today, give Dad's story a listen. It's kind of interesting to hear both their perspectives. Okay, I love you both. Thank you so much, Mom.
Love you too,
Happy
Mark.
Mother's Day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mom. You did a great job, not only with this podcast, but with dinner today. Wait until you see the video. She nailed everything. It was hard to squeeze Mom's story in an hour, but I'm glad we did record what we could, and now we have it forever. So precious. Thank you, Mom, and again, I love you with all my heart. Our podcast keeps growing nicely. We really need and appreciate your time to give us ratings and reviews. We have started our contest again for those that give us ratings and reviews. Here's how it works. Those that give us a rating and a review between now and July 1st will get their name in a drawing for one of our Candelaria Design tours. We will cover their round-trip airfare for the tour. I just returned from the Oregon Pinot Country, and we have an amazing tour coming together there, so stay tuned for more details coming on that. So go right now and give us a rating and review, along with a subscribe, and then email or direct message me that you did, and we will get your name in the hopper for this drawing. We do our best to inspire living in everything we do, from our podcast to our cooking classes to our tours, and of course, with our Candelaria Design homes. Okay, have a great week, everyone. Stay safe, and let's all live our lives with love, compassion, grace, and positivity. See you next week. Because Inspiring Living is all about the people and the organizations that inspire us, we are excited to have Monogram Appliances as one of our sponsors. Anytime we do a new kitchen or a kitchen remodel, Monogram Appliances are what we recommend to our client. Their appliances are the definition of luxury, meticulously detailed using the finest materials and an ownership experience that is second to none. This is how Monogram is always thinking ahead and inspiring and elevating the kitchen experience. Because at Monogram, they don't just elevate one thing, they elevate everything. I want to say a big thank you to my good friends at Stockett Tile and Granite Company, where your project is our priority. I want to thank the Stockett team along with so many others who contributed to the success of our fabulous demonstration kitchen in our new Candelaria Design office expansion. You will have to check out our online video cooking classes, and our kitchen is amazing. I've had the pleasure of working with the Stockett team for nearly 40 years on many spectacular projects, and trust me, they are the epitome of excellence when it comes to tile, marble, and granite work, bar none. Their skill and customer service is impeccable, and the bottom line is they are just good people. I have traveled with, dined with, and just had good times, both personally and professionally, with Dave Stockett and his lovely wife, Becky, and they are the best. When it comes to your next tile and stone project, make sure Stockett Tile and Granite is a part of your team. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed our podcast. We encourage you to write a review, screenshot it, and share it with your friends. Please instant message it to me and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We thank you for listening, and we look forward to sharing more insights to inspiring living next week.